Hello and welcome to the Bee Formless Flow Driven VC podcast. I can actually say it is Tuesday because it is Tuesday for both of us. And I'm welcoming to the show Sigvards Krongorns. I think I got that right. Sigvards. It's
Yep,
with an
perfect.
S. Well, welcome to the show.
Yeah, well, thanks, Belinda, and happy to be here.
No, thank you. And I'm pretty chuffed because I haven't spoken to anyone in Northern Europe and currently residing in Latvia. So this is a really, yeah, I feel really honored to be talking to you on a Tuesday morning, and it's Tuesday afternoon here. And we do have a connection. We have a little connection from an Australian angle in terms of you mentioned to me pre-show, and I look forward to getting into it, that you've recently had an Australian I don't even know how to explain this, but the first you've had your first portfolio company was an Australian company that came on board 2 months ago. So that's pretty cool. So you're used to this Aussie accent of mine.
So it's not our first portfolio company, it's our first portfolio company
Australia.
in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I should have said that. But anyway, let's
Oh,
just let's talk a little bit about you, and then I'm gonna share a little bit about you, and then let's get into your journey, having some amazing chats in this VC ecosystem space. But you're an investment associate at a Verge Health Tech Fund, and you're also the co-founder of Castprint. And that's a medtech startup pioneering lightweight ventilated 3D printed casts. So think casts like, when you break your wrist, I keep holding this up like that. So I'm really fascinated to kind of understand that in a bit more detail. And at Verge, you back early stage health tech companies globally. And at Castprint, you've helped bring a regulatory approved medical device to thousands of patients. Tell us a bit about your journey because what a fascinating experience in terms of it's almost like you've got two sides to what you're doing, and it's
yep.
really interesting.
Yep. Thanks. Yeah. So exactly. So my story in a relatively short overview is that what now, close to 9 years ago, next year it will be a whole 10 years since I came to this beautiful space called healthcare.
Mm,
And yeah, so me and my co-founder, and by the way, my background is not medical or clinical whatsoever, and my co-founders as well, but we had this crazy idea that, hey, people have broken their arms and legs for centuries, and the treatment method hasn't changed for the last 200 years. And after just a quick research, we were discussing technologies, 3D printing at that time as well. And yeah, we thought, okay, why not print one? And obviously, that was a whole journey of validating, building, doing research, you name it, and so fundraising, understanding actually what is the thing called startups. So it was a huge learning experience, and also in terms of like how do you scale, right? Because also you can be a let's say big fish in a small pond, but how do you scale outside of your home country?
yeah.
And so that was a lot of learnings and a lot of let's say have the scar tissue still to show for. But yeah, and so then afterwards, long story short, was around 21 during the whole pandemic stuff and everything else was that I realized that the company was already at that pay stage where it's less of a startup and it's more like a traditional, let's say, health tech company. And it's like having processes, procedures, procurements, working with government officials and so forth and so on. And then also I realized my own strengths is that I'm the last person you should put in the highly regulated, let's say, room with regulatory officials and so forth and so on. And I'm more like that starting up person, building from scratch, experimenting and so forth and so on. And then, yeah, I took a step back. My co-founder still runs the company. We're still great friends. And yeah, and the company is now break even, slowly, gradually growing. And yeah, it wasn't that, let's say, original expectation of a VC scalable startup, but it's still a great company, right? It still impacts a lot of people on a daily basis, right?
Yeah.
And my journey then afterwards was okay, so what for the last 5 years I've been working on essentially saying, hey, how can I help you? And so forth and so on. I was like thinking, okay, so what can I actually do? I can work in customer support, or because as a founder, you're essentially like a jack of all trades, right? And a master of
100%.
none,
So true. Yeah.
right? So from that perspective, obviously during that time, I met a lot of investors, other interesting people, and I once I decided to take a step back, I just emailed everyone in the newsletter saying, "Hey, this is the thing will be happening," and I think literally after an hour or so, so the managing partner and my colleague now, Joseph Makano, so he just reached out to me and said, "Hey, what are you doing next?" And I was like, "I don't know." And he said, "Hey, do you know my other partner, Erky, who's based in Estonia?" And I was like, "Of course, I pitched him many times, Casperant as well, during my time as an angel." And so afterwards, yeah, so we got together, and as they say in the movies, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So that's how I came to the other side of the table. And for the last, yeah, 4 years, I've been investing and looking for those next Casperints.
Wow, such an interesting story in terms of starting in like your own startup as a founder and then obviously building, scaling, getting to like that, break even point, which is huge in terms of, and then stepping away and then kind of not knowing sure what to do next. And then all of a sudden the opportunity comes at
Yeah.
you and here you are. What if you like what would be your biggest observation in terms of going from a founder into this new space as an investor?
There are so many, and I think every single, let's say, day has been an experience and a journey, right? And I think the biggest eye opener was that as a founder, and for let's say for obvious reasons and for good reasons, you have that, let's say, concrete worldview of your own as the startup, as the center of the world, and so forth and so on. And then you're thinking, okay, so this is how we do it, this is how it should work, and so on. But now, as on the other side, when you see, let's say, tens of cast prints or hundreds of cast prints on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, then as a VC, your perspective is less about the granular, it's more about, let's say, the macro stuff, right?
Mm,
What's happening, which as a founder, you don't get exposed to, right? Unfortunately. And that's understandable, but that's also the thing that really surprised me, but also it was a huge, let's say, learning experience, understanding, okay, so there are different ways how you can do it. And companies could literally look the same, but the challenge is that they're in different parts of the world, and in one part of the world, let's say that there isn't the right regulatory environment, or let's say the pushback or the culture to adapt that technology. But another one is like, yeah, we're gonna take it immediately, right? And so these kinds of, let's say, details has been quite eye-opening for me for the last couple of
mm,
years.
fascinating, fascinating. And what do you think has there been anything that you've missed from a founder, startup
Oh,
perspective on the
I
flip
think
side?
for sure, and I think the biggest I always tell founders is that who've been asking me the same thing is that adrenaline rush where you make that first sale who's not your, let's say, relative, to a customer that just wants a product that you are helping them to solve a problem, that feeling you cannot replicate in VC.
Mm,
Like any and not any investment or exit or whatsoever, you cannot replicate that. That you build something from scratch and somebody's willing to put down their hard-earned money. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting. What about like you mentioned when you and I want to talk about this a little bit in a bit more detail, but when you booked in for the pod, I asked the question around what's one unique insight or experience in life leadership and investing. And it's interesting that we've just been talking about because you said harness, own, and be proud of your strengths.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll go on feeling like you have one hand tied behind your back. Before you answer that, you were talking at the start and you said you didn't have any background in health tech or med tech, sorry, a med tech, health tech, same sort of thing. And yet you clearly had a strength in something. And I'd love to know what your actual background is, but you didn't let that stop you. You went out, you were curious, you explored and you didn't let yourself have that one hand tied behind your back in terms of, well, I don't have any experience in this space. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, and it's still a process, and by no means I'm still, let's say, fully discovered my own strength. I'm still learning, but the journey was that and my background. So for anyone interested, so my background is pure business, entrepreneurship. So, funny enough, it took me actually 7 years to have my bachelor thesis. So don't take let's say notes from me how to actually do academics, right? I'm the last person, but in some ways, particularly during Caspian times, I understood that there is this natural feeling that you're just some people say you just flourish when you're in that environment, right? Or let's say in those situations. And that in some cases, that was for me when we have literally a blank page and we need to create something. And it doesn't matter whether it's technology, whether it's a pitch, whether it's something, but it's that creativity, that starting up, that experimentation, if you like to say so, right? And that part always fascinated me, even today, right? But during back in those days, it was like, well, that's just me. That's nothing, right? A skill or something you should be proud of, you should be, right? You excel in finance or you excel presentation in public speaking or I don't know, yeah, investing in software and so on. That's not a skill, right? That's nothing to be afraid. It's you're good at experimentation or just thinking out loud, right? That's not a skill. And but over the later over the years and in some ways I noticed that particularly when going to the venture side as well is that when you have exposure to other, let's say, investing, deal making, and so far and so on, and speaking also with other founders,
Mm.
much more smart experienced ventures investors as well, I realized that the thing that separates me and in general people is that yeah, those environments, those feelings, those that edge, if you would say, right? And that was, I think, one of my biggest breakthroughs was that, look, just harness it. Let try slowly. Again, no big, let's say, big shebangs or anything. Just on a daily basis, slowly, just harness it. Own it, be proud of it, and hopefully you will enjoy it. And some now looking back, now a couple of years, once I had that switch, I've never felt better. I've never had better sleep. I never had better relationships. And it's that some people say being in line with yourself, right?
Yeah,
Or you can name it
connecting to your soul.
otherwise.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Exactly. And so in my case, it was that I see founders, right? So they are trying to play the game when they pitch to VCs, right? So they need to be looks a certain type, sound a certain type, their business needs to be a certain type with certain types of metrics and so on. And unfortunately, that's sometimes for me internally is like, why? Why should you, right? If it's not you, if it's not naturally, it's not your strength. If you're playing someone else's game, it's literally like
You're going to get
one
unstuck.
hand tied against your back.
Yeah, I like that. I really love that analogy because I think you're right. Like in terms of if you're playing to someone else's game, if you're, kind of leveraging someone else's, not even strengths, it's just like know who you are
Yeah.
and be and play the authentic game that is what you are true to you're meant to be playing. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think that this happens time and time again in business, in life, that we feel like we have to keep up or we have to be
Yep.
something, we have to wear the mask.
Yep.
It's that old, I guess, definition for me of what success looks like
Yeah.
versus how do you reshape it and how do you create it in a way that is going to enable you to shine your brightest and really kind
Exactly.
of, I guess leverage the strengths you've got and master them in a way that sets you apart. That's what I see. Versus
Exactly.
because sorry, you go.
No, no, so exactly. So it's that saying that you understand yourself, right? Your strengths. One of my favorite books has always been Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and it's famous for that quote, know yourself and know your enemy, right? In one, and so if you know yourself and know your enemy in 100 battles, you won't need to fear the outcomes. To paraphrasing the quote. So, this is the same thing, right? It has been for centuries old, but somehow in this day and age, where there's a lot of narrative, a lot of, let's say, things happening, we're all busy, right? Everyone's busy running around and so forth. And so we lose ourselves, and we try to, let's say, uh, we fear being left alone, or let's say outside of, let's say, the community, or left outside of the in crowd and so on. So interesting
Yeah.
observation. Yeah, I would say
Yeah,
for
it
myself.
really is. Do you think it's more prevalent in the VC ecosystem? Like, or do you like, I mean, or do you think it's just across the board when it comes to business and that leadership in general? Like, what's your view on that?
I, I, it, I would assume that it's not only in VC or startups or let's say in our bubble,
Mm.
but for sure in the VC space, literally you can see it on a daily basis,
Why is
right?
it? Why is there still this barrier? Or why is there still this like is it like I mean when you think about hierarchy and, I guess just business in general, there's almost like there's this old form, if you like. And yet,
Uh,
mm,
yeah, I think that the challenge here is that, well, what is venture capital and venture funds? So it's when someone else, right, LPs, limited partners, have actually granted them their money. And one of the things that I was been recently pondering is that when you take someone else's money, how that influences your decision making? Or
mm,
more importantly, how does that influences your communication? Because when you, let's say, make a decision, you will have to report to someone. You'll have to communicate why did you make that decision. When in some cases, right, you don't know why, but you have that gut feeling because from your own perspective, your own worldview,
mm,
you wanted to make that decision, right? Often not that you can communicate it, but sometimes you cannot. And so having to play again, we will have that reference maybe several times here is that playing that game, right? And it's the game that there's a certain type of, let's say, venture capitalists. Again, now with social media and everything else, you see how a venture capitalist should look like. You're brush talking, shoot for the moon, uh, 24-hour term sheets, and so forth, and high conviction, so forth and so on. When in reality, if another, let's say, venture capitalist is different by nature, they're different style, right? Different, let's say, worldview. And if they will try to play the same game as, let's say, I don't know, Harry Stebbings from 20 BC, then obviously they're going to lose because they're not Harry, right? And so forth but they will do it because it's expected, right? They want to be successful. It's there also because, well, venture capitalists also make a living from management fees and so forth. So that's their livelihood as well impacted, right? So they're afraid if they don't won't look the part, they won't close the fund. Hence, they need to look for it and so forth. So, and again, it's understandable, but at the same time, it's like, yeah. And then I was having that discussion. I haven't done the research yet. Is I was wondering in terms of is there a correlation between uh, the VC who is like in line with himself or herself and the performance of the actual fund,
mm.
right? I don't know if is it any actually possible to try it out or have that correlation. I don't know, but as a, let's say, hypothesis, I was having that the other day is that, yeah, VCs or in general people, right, who are in line with their own beliefs, like their own Zen, right? How does that translate actually to the outputs, whether it's fund performance, being supporting the portfolio, having great relationship off work, right, and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting, isn't it? Super interesting that you're even talking about this because, like, it's such a conversation. Because I won't lie, when I started talking to, VCs, I had this expectation of these really, like, ruthless, if you like. Like this certain type. And I was like, I remember one recently, I was having almost like these like heart palpitations going, can I do this? Because I don't think I'm as good as them. And they're
Mhm.
here and and then I got on the Zoom and it was just like, no, actually, we're just both human beings at the end of the day. I'm just going to ask you questions. This is who I am. This is who you, and we had the longest and best chat because there was no barrier there. It was just that I had this expectation versus the reality of it. But I think we all at times, and I don't know about you, but I'd love to know, but we've all put the mask on as being
Mhm.
somebody in leadership or when you're scaling that you're not, especially if there's, whether you've been acquired by a company or a holding company or whether you've got investors or not, there's this expectation, and so
For
you
sure.
you almost change somewhat to actually appease is the wrong word, but to give them the results. And yet, what if
Sure.
we just got the results, but did it in a way that was unique and authentic to who we are versus having to be something that we're not?
Exactly. And that's a great question and an interesting hypothesis to potentially see how would it play out. But yeah, and yeah, it's funny and it's also sometimes also sad, right? Because when you speak one-on-one with other, let's say, fellow investors who literally are struggling because they're investing in companies or they're when, for example, I always ask, okay, so you're doing a great company or doing a deal. Well, why are you doing it? Well, because XYZ, because that fund is there, or because it's one of the best ones, they have great traction. It's like, okay, but what's your role in this round? Are you actually adding value? Yeah, I'm adding value. How? All right. Do you know something? Can you influence the outcome? And this is where the disconnect comes in. Also, sometimes where you potentially when you make an investment, it's like, okay, and what next? Like hoping for the best or what? And when that happens, well, the statistics are brutal, right? For venture capital as an asset class. And yeah, the challenge is that, well, sometimes you just don't know what to do. And again, obviously, to the best founders and to the best and startups, you don't actually need they don't need your help, right? Because
No.
they're the found their stellar teams and so on. But in let's say the vast majority, the startups actually need support, need help, need guidance. And if you're not aligned or not uh, in tune with that investment as your own, let's say, worldview, how can you actually help them, right? I don't know if it makes sense.
No, it's making sense. I've got lots of questions that are coming out of this for me though, with what you're just talking about, because a first question is, do you think that the VC has genuinely had almost like a bad rap, like, or a bad, like when I say like is that like from like the past, or is it more that there's been a disconnect between the founder or the business that's scaling and the investor?
I
Like,
wouldn't
what's your
say
view
it's a
on all of
bad,
that? Pardon?
yeah, I wouldn't say it's a bad rep because there
No.
is a reason
Yeah.
why VCs are looked at because of their actions,
Yeah.
right? So there's no way around it. So
No.
there's a reason why we have this image of these, let's say, brutal numbers only VCs and so on. So there's a reason for it. I think the challenge is, and why is that, is because unfortunately, and to some extent it goes along with what we are discussing before, is nobody's actually being honest with the other party or actually themselves, right? And if they're not honest with themselves, how can they be honest with the other party, which is the founder as a founder to investor, investor to a founder relationship? Because well, venture capital is a brutal math business, right? So the mathematics of venture funds in order to actually generate those expected 3x returns net are brutal. And there's a certain only certain types of companies that actually can fit the profile, and the majority cannot, right? And fortunately or unfortunately, that's not being explicitly outsaid, right, by us as VCs. And again, why is that? Because we are also impacted by the management fees from LPs and so forth and so on. And this is the disconnect. And once we have that inner disconnect, then also the relationship with the founders goes sour. Ergo, you have the rep what you have, right? So,
Yeah, it's really, and that wasn't a disrespectful question, by the way. I was just wanting to kind of get your
no.
view on like the like the whole that like yeah, because it's interesting and how it is somewhat disconnected. But then how do we solve it? How like how do you fix it? How do you fix this disconnection and it to become better interconnected and everyone working together? Because that's what it feels like. There's a mix of what I'm seeing is, when I'm speaking to various people in the VC, kind of ecosystem, if you like. There's, people like you who have been a founder, but also been now an investor. So you understand the founder world, but you also now understand the investor. So you're almost like that hybrid that's come together. But then you've still got, yeah, founders over here, investors over here. An investor's never been a founder, doesn't understand necessarily the daily struggles of if someone's scaling, starting up, and yet, then you've got the founder that doesn't necessarily, like you say, understand the macro aspect of investing in VC. So it's kind of almost like for me, it's there's this kind of almost like ingredients going on, and it's like, how do you put it back together, or how do you reshape it to take it into this new world order where we're at this pivotal point in time where the opportunities are endless.
I think, and that is the $1 million question or the $1 billion question, right? That you're asking, and definitely, I'm and our fund is not unique in that sense, and there are a lot of other VCs have been asking the same question publicly or privately, and maybe it won't sound as unique, the answer, but in my mind, it's transparency, right? It's like, what are your goals and why are you asking that question? What do you want to achieve through this relationship, whether it's through an investment, whether it's through that call, through that mentoring session, or whatever, is having that honest conversation. And when both parties saying honestly, what do you want out of this? Then you have your cards stacked, and then you can actually see, okay, do you have any middle ground? Do you have any connections? Do you have any disconnect, fundamental, right? Where you're not aligned and it won't work. And that's okay, right? So, for example, if uh, a founder is building, I don't know, a 5x business, right? So five times the, let's say, revenue from, let's say, 5 million or 10 million. Great business, great, amazing, right? But for us as a fund, we if the company will be have that success of that 10 million, right, revenue, we won't. And it's great for a founder, but for us, if anything less, let's say 100 million, it's like it's great, but not, let's say, amazing, right? And
Yeah.
again, we still need to make that rest returns. And so that's the challenge, right? Is like having that VC math actually exposed, actually telling the founders, hey, I love what you're doing. You're doing great work, right? And particularly in healthcare, right? When we're talking about
Yeah.
impacting lives in Africa, where we invest in all the across all the continents, right? And having those founders creating impact and so forth and so on, which is amazing. But sometimes the challenge is that yes, we back impactful health techs, but unfortunately, we impactful health techs at scale. So they
Mm.
need to scale, and that is the honest truth, and maybe some will say ugly truth, but that's just how we work, right? And that's the math. And I think that's the disconnect, and that transparency can actually bridge those, let's say, relationships and bridge that communications gap between founders.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're talking about this, like, because it seems so simple, but and I'm going to even simplify it even more. It's like, how do you create that shared clear goal, like from the
Mhm.
outset? from the minute the founder and the investor are coming together, what is the shared clear goal? Like, what is it that we're doing as a partnership versus, you know, having to hit a certain amount of numbers, et cetera, and the expectations? Because, we've all got various goals, we've got various expectations. But what if we could
Exactly.
just establish from the outset and agree what success or what good looks like?
Exactly. And the thing is that sooner or later, even there are so many cases I have seen directly, indirectly, is that when both of you are honest and when you're not completely apparently honest, right? And back from my founder days as well as in the investor days, and sooner or later it'll come up. Whether it's today, tomorrow, 2 years, 5 years down the road. But if you're not aligned, if you haven't been fully transparent about your goals, about your expectations, about your outcomes, sooner or later it'll come up, right? And once it comes up, then you have all the stories about disgruntled VCs, disgruntled founders. VCs are bad, founders are lazy, and so forth, and so yada yada yada. Yeah. So again, it's
And I
like
think that's
you
where I
can
was
literally
going. Yeah, and that's where I was going earlier. It sounds like it's just like that's what needs to be kind of, I guess, subtracted, removed out of the equation so that we can do good business and have a good partnership and go forward. But there is this kind of like almost like that tension point, and it happens across not just VC, in all businesses. And what you're talking
exactly.
about here is that this need to be transparent and from the inside out, because it can look very differently on the outside versus what actually is going on the inside. So what if we started from the inside and then worked
Mhm.
outwardly? Imagine what
Exactly.
imagine what is possible.
Exactly.
So what is it that you guys are doing differently then? How are you addressing it in the Verge Health Tech Fund? Like in terms of, yeah, like what are you guys doing differently?
So first and foremost, we fight each other all the time in investment committees, in having that super hard discussions, right? And still because and that also comes the challenge with speed. So we're definitely not the fastest VC out there, comparing, let's say, to our peers and so forth and so on, because we really take our time in terms of due diligence, in terms
Yeah,
of really understanding, debating internally from all aspects, right? Because again, we're specialist funds. We have the networks, we can validate, we can call our network, understanding potential clients, potential recruits, potential other follow-on investors, late stage investors, and so forth. So we can and that's relatively unique to us because, again, unfortunately, or fortunately for us, is there aren't that many health tech VCs globally that invest across the globe. And because of that, we see this unique opportunity that we can really understand, okay, what is the core problem that a company is solving, and can this scale? Is it a breakthrough company? Is it a nice to have or a must have, right? And again, a lot of VCs and investors claim that, right? But for us, it's like natural, like understanding. Okay, and because we have seen great technologies sort of that improve 10%, 20%, 30%, which again for human people, it's amazing, right? In terms of livelihood, in terms of, let's say, yeah, daily life, and so on. But the challenge is that it cannot scale, right? And that's the honest truth. Again, that what we look is impactful health tech global companies. So you
mm,
need to all three of them. And
mm,
one of the questions is always, okay, it's great, it can work, let's say in Australia, but will this scale also in Africa, in Kenya, in
mm.
Cote d'Ivoire, in South Africa, in Zambia, or vice versa, right? Can this technology or team from Kenya actually go global, right? Or is it an regional play? And all of these types of questions. So this is how we try to think is like, how do you actually create impact, but also make the math work?
Yeah, it's
And
really, yeah,
We're still learning, to be fully transparent. We're still learning.
yeah.
And we're by no means, I think we are still in the early stages. but and there's a lot of, let's say, learnings to be learned along the way for sure. But yeah, this is how we think, and this is again that our worldview, how we think,
Yeah.
very unique to us, and because of that, the only let's say the only ones that can shoot ourselves, we can only shoot ourselves in the foot in
Mm.
terms of not achieving our goals, and that's it.
I love it though because you're reshaping, you're learning, you're iterating as you go. Like there's nothing what is linear anymore in this world we're in. Like it's non-linear. So looking at it. So you've talked about like is it scalable from a global perspective? We've got a couple of quick more questions for you. What do you look for in the founder? Like you've been a founder. Like I've been talking to a lot of different people in the VC as well and they, they say it's like less about the product and it's more about what the potential of the founder, which I find fascinating because you've just talked about this impact and scale and, can it scale globally? What are you looking for in a founder then as part of this package?
So, and the simple and honest answer is that having that mindset about these things that we just discussed, about
Okay.
impact, about global, being aware, being aware with their own strengths, right? Having that transparency, honestly, having that self-awareness, right? One of the things that we would like to see is self-awareness, understanding. Of course, there are other, let's say, the classical things that we look for founders, that grit, previous experience, and so forth and so on. But those like self-awareness, understanding founder that have that drive to make that impact, right? And again, sometimes it's quantifiable, like you can
Yeah.
see from what they have done in their past lives or from their own, let's say, how they react, how they communicate, how they respond, or we just have that feeling sometimes, right? Because again, sometimes it's a gut feeling, right, for the
Yeah, the
partnership.
intuition kicks in. Do you look for this you might think I'm totally random asking this question, and it is a bit random, but that's, kind of I do like to throw a good old question. But do you look for founders with soul? Like as in soul, like have a soul? Like do you look for founders that like if we come back to this authenticity, transparency piece, if you
I
think
would
about
like to think so. I would like to think so.
yeah,
Right? But I'm also aware that again, it's like I have my views, right? And then there's the rest of the team.
yeah,
And again, we also see that from within our partners, right? We see that each partner has different background, different experience, and they have their different, let's say, also founder type or founder flavor, and that's okay, right? It's that's totally understandable, but I think the underlying what takes everyone in the team together is that drive. Do you want to actually make an impact, right? And
mm,
are you aware that it's not just, let's say, Europe or Australia or the US, but actually the world is much more larger. And can your technology actually help also people in Africa or
yeah, the
Southeast Asia?
emerging, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, interesting, interesting. I've got one last question for you. You talked around this founder flair founder, kind of what do you like? I mean, you've talked about what you look for, but what question am I asking here? I'm asking a question about if a founder's looking for an investor or or an investor's looking for, I guess where you guys are at from a health tech, med tech space. What would be one thing that you would be a non-negotiable, like when you're looking?
Integrity.
Mm.
Integrity. It's like that's like the non-negotiable one of the first, right? Integrity and don't sh yes, again, we sugarcoat, we let's say extend the truth and software and so on, but integrity. You
Mm.
never lie. You never, and I don't know, I swear, but yeah, you don't wanna lead on, right? You and that sort of stuff because integrity is like the fundamental non-negotiable.
Yeah.
If from the get-go. you're like literally like claiming one thing, right? The product is this, and then when you look at it, nobody's using it. Who's lying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And again, I understand the pressures and everything else that comes being a founder, right? Particularly if you have a team that's relying you on fundraising and so forth and so on. But again, sooner or later it will come out. And so my uh, advice to founders is that you won't get every single investor. Might as well be honest from day one.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Yeah. And what should a founder be looking for?
Sorry, can you repeat?
What should a founder be looking for?
Oh, a founder should uh, look, so definitely they should do the same type of due diligence as uh, VCs do on founders, vice versa, in
Yeah.
terms of what's their background, what's their track record,
Yeah.
talking with their peers, talking with their portfolio companies, right? Understanding how they performing when everything is right, and particularly when everything is going sour. Right? Maybe you see a company that has been, let's say, written off or went bankrupt, and you reach out to that founder and actually see, okay, you had that investor. How did he behave or she during that time? Were they supportive? Were they not? Why? And for a founder, it's super, and again, from my own founder experiences, like have particularly in the early days, a great helpful investor is like, yeah, I mean, as important as a co-founder to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Is having that alignment, having that backing, having that support,
Yeah.
it's an immense. So I would say for founders is definitely don't rush, take your time, do the due
Yeah.
diligence, and really double check everything. Because, and again, I understand, but VCs also stretch the truth. Everyone's value add.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone's amazing.
100%.
Everyone's looking for breakthrough founders. Everyone's
Yeah.
looking and everything else, right? So everyone can read the cliff notes on the landing page, but take your time, don't rush,
Be curious.
and be curious. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So you've got Sigvards. How do we find out more about you? Where's the best place? Because you've had so much like great words of wisdom, great advice. Obviously, then an investor yourself. Where do we find out more about you? Where's
Yeah,
the best
sure. I
place?
think the easiest one is connect me on LinkedIn, reach out to me. One thing is that preferably when you reach out, say why. Otherwise, what's the context?
Yeah,
So, particularly in this day and age of AI, automations and everything else, when you reach out, at least say why, or
yeah.
that you listen to the podcast. Then at least I know where did you come from and why.
Yeah, I love it. I love it because you're all about this authenticity. Absolutely love it. So thank you so much. And then obviously from a Verge Health Tech Fund, the Verge.fund, and then
Yep.
Cusprint is cusprint.co. So huge thank you because it's been such a fascinating chat and just getting that fresh but different perspective. It's been really refreshing. So thank you.
Thanks, B.
No,
Thank you.
have a great day.
You too.
Thank
Cheers.
you.